in my opinion, inside Greater Israel today, you have probably about 7.3 million Palestinians and about 7.3 million Jews. And if they expel all the Palestinians like they want to, you probably have 7.3 million Jews. But the other question you have to ask yourself is what's going to happen to all those Israeli Jews over time? How many are going to stay there? How many have already left? How many will leave when the shooting stops? I mean, what is the future of Israel? And I would argue it's not a very bright future. I talked about the fault lines inside the society before and what that means for the future. I think all of this war, it really spooks people. And when you see that you have neighbors that have missiles that can hit you and you get into fights like the fight that the Israelis just got into with the Iranians, you want to ask yourself, what are the consequences of that for the population? Will people leave? Are people going to go to Israel? I wouldn't bet a lot of money on that. And I wouldn't be surprised if a good number of people leave because they just don't feel safe there. And by the way, we were talking about the possibility of Iran getting nuclear weapons. What if Iran gets nuclear weapons and at the same time, Israel and Iran continue to have poisonous relations between the two countries? Would you want to live in Israel? I'm not sure about that. It's the size of a postage stamp, and you have this country, Iran, and we're hypothesizing that it might have a couple nuclear weapons. This is not a good situation. Anyway, I think that if you look at this country, it does not have a bright future. Now, I think that Benjamin Netanyahu would disagree with that. And he would tell people that if you follow my policies and the Americans support us hook, line, and sinker, we're going to create a greater Israel and live happily ever after. But I
Right.
don't think so.
So it's kind of his mistake, his strategic mistake, you think, is relying on the goodwill or the unwavering support of the West? Because part of me thinks maybe it is rational because no one is standing up to this starvation, to this, like, genocidal behavior that invokes so many comparisons to the Holocaust, and I have to say that I'm working on this documentary about Holocaust survivors speaking out against the genocide, and I've interviewed people who are survivors, the children of survivors, but also people who are just involved in the Middle East. And I interviewed Daniel Levy the other day, who used to be an Israeli negotiator. He's English, but he spent a lot of time in Israel. And he said that, he used to always avoid comparisons between the Nazis and Israelis. And that is very forbidden, verboten, right? Israel, you're not allowed to do that. Only Israel can weaponize the Holocaust. No one else can use it. So they get to call other people Nazis. They get to call Hamas Nazis, but you can't make any parallels. But what Daniel Levy said was that it's almost like Israel is daring people to compare them to the Nazis with their actions.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the key piece here, by the way, I mean, I've read a number of pieces by Daniel, and I know him quite well,
Yeah.
have great respect for him. But the key piece is the writings or the key pieces of the writings of Omer Bartov,
Yeah.
who was an Israeli by birth, served in the IDF, and has been a historian of the Holocaust at Brown University for a long time. I actually have taught his books over time in my classes, and he is highly regarded. And he has said that he believes that what the Israelis are doing is a Holocaust or is a genocide.
Yeah.
And that really, I think, has had a big impact. And of course, all sorts of individuals and organizations with real standing, like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, various people in the United Nations have said that this is a Holocaust or a genocide. And so I think that label is now beginning to stick in ways that leaves many Israelis and certainly the Israeli government very uncomfortable. And they'll go to great lengths to cut against that. But the more this goes on, the more difficult that becomes. And you want to remember here, we just want to think about this just when we're assessing the strategy. What's the ending here?
Yeah.
How does this end? Uh, I'm hoping every day, I hope that Trump moves in and says enough is enough. And the Israelis are forced to accept a ceasefire and supply trucks flow into Gaza. Let's assume that that happens. That would be wonderful in a certain sense, but at the same time, it hardly goes anyways towards solving the basic problem. These people have no homes. Gaza's been made unlivable. They really have no place to go unless the Madagascar option is realized. And I don't think that's going to happen either. But what's the end result here? And, the Israelis don't like the idea of having 7.3 million Palestinians in their midst. Okay, but you can't get rid of them. Therefore, you have 7.3 million Palestinians inside your borders, and those people are living in the most horrible of conditions. uh, what does this mean? The world is going to mobilize against you. Maybe the US government will protect you and it will limit the leverage of the so called international community. But nevertheless, the consequences for your country are going to be horrific, right? The moral stain on your reputation is going to be huge. And what does that mean for people who live inside Israel? And furthermore, just to take this a step further, because we want to think about where this train is headed, what about the lobby? The lobby is already overexposed from its own point of view. It's out in the open. It's playing smash mouth politics. It's acting in ways that are fundamentally at odds with basic American values like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. Is the lobby going to be forced to continue acting this way for year after year? This will be disastrous for the United States. This is a terrible situation inside the United States. The situation with the lobby is terribly unhealthy for liberal America. And I don't mean liberal in the sense of a liberal Democratic Party. I mean liberal in the Lockean sense of the term, liberal in the sense that we're all part of a liberal society. Having the lobby, act the way it's been acting in recent years for the foreseeable future would be disastrous. So if you sort of think about where we are and how we get out of this, I don't see any solution at all. And I think pursuing Netanyahu's policies just make the situation worse. But again, if you go to I think vast majority is probably too strong a word, but the clear majority of Israel's supporters in the United States and tell them that we're in a terrible situation, they would agree. And if you say, how do we get out of it? They would say, more force, more force. Just, pound the Palestinians, pound Israel's neighbors. That's the solution. And I've long ago come to the conclusion that there are real limits to what you could do in any situation like this with military force. But Israel and its supporters, they reject that line of argument. They think that you can solve political problems with the big stick, with the iron wall, with military force. But
Right.
I don't think so.
Yeah, the Iron Wall, of course, which is, of course, reminds one of, Jabotinsky, who's another Texas Chainsaw Massacre type of, leader who, again, in a very refreshing, clarifying way, said the quiet part out loud. Israel is a colonial project. I mean, he talked about how natives always resist colonizers, and he was referring to the Palestinians, and the Israelis. He wasn't obviously being critical, he was embracing it. He and the other revisionist Zionists were in some ways, it's much easier to deal with because you know what you are dealing with. But, so I mean, if we look at history though as an example, like, will Israel be just fine as long as it doesn't, try to invade Western Europe or Eastern Europe?
Well, it's not going to be just fine.
Not stopped, I should say.
It's at war with a handful of its neighbors. It's a highly aggressive state prone to violence. There's no evidence that that's going to change. It has this huge looming problem with Iran. It has powerful centrifugal forces at play inside the body politic. And I believe the situation with the lobby here in the United States is not sustainable over the long term. I think now that what the lobby does is out in the open, and now that the lobby's paying playing smash mouth politics, that this can't go on forever. And so I think, again, I think Israel is in real trouble.